Theo Marsh was halfway through plating a dozen scallops when his phone buzzed against the steel counter for the fourth time in an hour. He ignored it the way he ignored most things that weren't in front of him. The ticket rail, the hiss of the pan, the particular golden crust he was chasing on the sear. The restaurant was called Ember, and it was the kind of place that got written up in magazines with words like elevated and unpretentious, which was a contradiction Theo had stopped trying to reconcile. He just cooked. He'd been cooking since he was 19, and now, at 31, he ran the past like a man defusing something that might go off. The phone buzzed again. "You gonna get that?" said Priya, his sous chef, sliding a pan of brown butter across the flat top without looking up. "It's not going anywhere. Neither is your face, currently, which looks like somebody died." Theo wiped his hands on his apron and glanced at the screen. 6 missed calls, all from a number he hadn't seen in 4 years, saved under a name he'd never bothered to delete. Cal. He stepped into the walk-in, which was the closest thing Ember had to privacy, and pressed play on the voicemail with his back against a rack of butter lettuce crates, cold air prickling the back of his neck. "Theo, obviously it's me. Look, I know it's been a long time, and I know I have no right to be calling you like this, but," a pause. Wind, somewhere on Cal's end, and the low complaint of some farm machinery. "My dad's gone. 2 weeks ago. Heart. And I'm out here trying to bring in the last of the harvest by myself before the frost, and I can't." Another pause. Longer. "I need help, Theo. I know that's not fair to ask, but I don't have anybody else who'd know what they were doing. And I keep thinking about how you used to say you missed the smell of cut hay. And I thought, God, I don't know what I thought. Just, please, come to the farm. Just for the harvest. I'll explain everything when you're here. I have to show you something anyway. Please." The message ended. Theo stood very still in the cold, the hum of the compressor the only sound, and felt something in his chest crack open like a seed case. Cal Whitfield had been the first person Theo ever loved, back when love still had that unbearable, upturned palm quality of a boy who didn't know yet that it could be taken from him. They'd grown up 2 farms apart outside a town so small it didn't have a stoplight, just a 4-way stop everyone treated as a suggestion. They'd been 14 when they first kissed behind the Whitfield hay barn, both of them terrified, both of them certain the sky would fall. It hadn't. Not then. It had fallen 4 years ago, instead, in a parking lot outside a hospital in Denver, when Cal had looked at Theo, 27 years old, exhausted, his father's blood pressure finally stabilized after the stroke, and said the words that ended them. "I can't keep living 2 lives, Theo. My dad doesn't know. My town doesn't know. I can't lose the only home I've got left. Not for." He hadn't finished the sentence. He hadn't needed to. Theo had left that night and hadn't gone back. Now Cal's father, the reason Cal had said those words, was dead. And Cal was calling, 6 times, voice cracking down a bad connection, asking Theo to come home. Priya found him 20 minutes later, still holding the phone, the scallops long since abandoned to somebody else's pan. "You're doing the thing," she said. "What thing?" "The thing where you stand very still and think you're not visibly falling apart." She took the phone gently out of his hand, checked the screen, whistled low. "Cal. The Cal? Farm Cal? First love, ruined you for Brooklyn for a year, Cal? His dad died." Priya's face changed instantly, the teasing gone. "Theo, he wants me to come help with the harvest." He heard himself say it, and it sounded absurd, a plotline from something, not a real request landing on a real Tuesday in the middle of dinner service. "He said he needs to show me something. So go. I have a restaurant to run. You have a co-chef to run it, which is me, and I have been asking for more of the pass for 8 months. So this is honestly good news for me." Priya folded her arms. "Theo, when was the last time you took more than 3 days off?" He didn't answer, because they both knew the answer was never, not since Cal. "Go," she said again, softer. "Whatever this is, go find out." The drive out of the city took 6 hours, and somewhere around hour for the skyline gave way to grain elevators, and the grain elevators gave way to nothing at all but gold stretching to a horizon that looked close enough to touch and was, in fact, 40 miles away. Theo had forgotten how the light changed out here, how it went thick and amber in the late afternoon, how it made even a rusted fence line look like something a painter had chosen on purpose. He'd forgotten, too, how his own chest would tighten as the county road narrowed, as the mailboxes grew more familiar. as he passed the four-way stop that still didn't have a stoplight, and probably never would. The Whitfield farm sat at the end of a gravel lane lined with cottonwoods that had been saplings when Theo was a boy sneaking down them at midnight, his bike tires silent on the dirt because he'd learned exactly which ruts to avoid. The house was the same. White clapboard, green shutters, a porch that sagged a half-inch more than it used to. But everything around it had the specific, aching disarray of a place being held together by one exhausted person. Fields gone unharvested at the edges. A tractor with its hood up, tools scattered like it had been abandoned mid-thought. A barn door hanging crooked on its hinge. And Cal. He came around the side of the barn at the sound of tires on gravel, and Theo's hands went unsteady on the wheel before he'd even fully parked. For years had put new lines at the corners of Cal's eyes and taken the last softness out of his jaw. He was still broad through the shoulders in the way that farm work built rather than a gym. Still had that particular way of standing like he was bracing against wind even when there wasn't any. His hair was longer, sun-streaked, pushed back like he'd been running his hands through it out of habit or worry. He was wearing a flannel with the sleeves torn off at the shoulder, and there was engine grease on his forearm and grief on his whole face, the kind that didn't need explaining because Theo had seen the same look in a mirror once after his mother. "You came," Cal said, when Theo got out of the car. His voice cracked on the second word. "You asked." "I didn't think, after everything I said to you." "Cal." Theo stopped a few feet from him, close enough to see that Cal's eyes were rimmed red, the kind of red that came from more than one bad night. "Your dad's dead. I'm not going to make you get through the harvest alone because you hurt my feelings 4 years ago." Something in Cal's face broke, just slightly, just at the edges. The specific fracture of a man who has been holding a barn door shut against a storm by himself and has just been told, finally, that someone else has arrived to take some of the weight. "Thank you," he said, and it came out ragged. Theo, against every piece of advice he would have given anyone else in his position, crossed the last few feet of gravel and pulled him into a hug. Cal made a sound against his shoulder that wasn't quite a sob and held on like he'd forgotten how to do anything else. Neither of them said anything about the 4 years. Not yet. They fell into the rhythm of harvest the way people who'd once loved each other fell into everything, wordlessly, efficiently, with a kind of muscle memory that outlasted heartbreak. Theo hadn't touched a combine in a decade, but his hands remembered the checks Cal's father had drilled into both of them as teenagers, and by the second morning he was driving the header line as straight as Cal was, the two of them working opposite ends of the same fields under a sky the color of a bruise healing. They talked, in pieces, across the days. Not about the parking lot in Denver, not yet, but about smaller things. Cal's father, Walt, who'd apparently softened in his last years, who'd started asking about Theo without ever quite saying his name, who'd left, in his desk, an unopened letter addressed to Cal that Cal hadn't found the courage to read yet. "What do you think it says?" Theo asked. On the fourth night, the two of them sitting on the porch steps with beers going warm in their hands, cicadas roaring in the dark like the whole county was holding its breath. "I don't know." Cal turned the bottle in his fingers. "I keep thinking it's going to be him telling me he was disappointed. About everything. About me not giving him grandkids, or not marrying Sarah Dunhill like everybody in town figured I would. Or," he stopped. "Or about me," Theo said quietly. Cal looked at him for a long moment in the dark. He knew, Theo. I think he'd known for years. I think that's part of why I was so scared, back then. Not that he'd find out, but that he already knew and was just waiting for me to be brave enough to say it out loud, and I never was. You're being brave now, am I? Or am I just alone and scared and reaching for the only person who ever made this place feel like it had room for me in it? Theo's chest ached at that, at the honesty of it, the lack of performance. This wasn't the Cal who'd stood in a parking lot 4 years ago and chosen a version of safety that cost them everything. This was a man 3 weeks into grief, stripped down to something truer. Maybe both things can be true, Theo said. Maybe you can be scared and still be doing something brave. Cal huffed something that was almost a laugh. "When did you get wise?" "Around the time you broke my heart." Turns out it's a good teacher. He hadn't meant to say it, hadn't meant to let the old wound show its edge like that, but Cal didn't flinch from it. He turned toward Theo on the step, close enough that Theo could see the grief and the want tangled together in his face, indistinguishable from each other. "I think about that day more than you know," Cal said. I've thought about it every single day for 4 years. I told myself I did the right thing, protecting this place, protecting my dad from having to know something that might have broken something between us. And every single day I've hated myself a little more for it. Cal, let me finish. Please. He set the beer down on the step, both hands free now, restless. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know that's not something you owe me. I asked you here because I needed help with the harvest, and that's true. And it's also not the whole truth, because I could have hired a crew out of Larson County and been done in a week. I called you because I've spent 4 years without you, and it's the only 4 years of my life I'd erase if I could. And I don't know how to say that without it sounding like I'm asking for something I don't have the right to ask for. The cicadas kept roaring. The porch light buzzed, moth-haunted, above them. What are you asking for? Theo said, very quietly. Cal looked at him, and for the first time in 4 years, he didn't look away. A second chance to not be a coward. They didn't kiss that night. Theo wasn't ready to hand his whole heart back over on the strength of one porch confession, however much it had cracked something open in his chest, and Cal, to his credit, didn't push. He just reached over in the dark and took Theo's hand, and Theo let him, and they sat like that until the beers went flat, and the cicadas quieted, and the ache in Theo's chest turned, slowly, into something that felt dangerously close to hope. The harvest went on. 10-hour days in the field, dust in their teeth, the particular full-body exhaustion that Theo had almost forgotten was possible, the kind that came from work you could see the shape of when it was done. In the evenings, Cal cooked, badly, and Theo took over. And something about standing in Walt Whitfield's kitchen teaching Cal how to properly sear a steak felt like closing a loop that had been open for a decade. On the 7th night, with the last of the wheat in and the grain bins full and the fields stretching pale gold and shorn under a harvest moon, Cal finally opened his father's letter. He asked Theo to be there when he did it. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where 16-year-old Theo had eaten 100 suppers, and Cal's hands shook as he slit the envelope. He read it twice, silently, and when he looked up his eyes were wet. He knew, Cal said, about us. He'd known since we were kids, he said he used to watch us disappear behind the hay barn and pretend he didn't notice, because he figured it wasn't his business until we made it his business. A wet laugh. He said the only thing he regretted in his whole life was never telling me it was okay. That he'd been raised to think certain things and spent his whole life unlearning them too slowly. And that by the time he understood there was nothing wrong with his son loving another man, he was too much of an old, stubborn fool to know how to say it out loud. He said, Cal's voice broke entirely. He said if I ever got the chance to have you back, I shouldn't be the kind of coward he was. He said the farm doesn't mean anything if there's nobody in that kitchen with me who I love. Theo reached across the table and took his hand. There's more, Cal said. He left me the West 40, the old orchard acres, past the creek. Said I should build something there. Something that's mine. Ours, he said, if I was lucky enough for there to be an ours. Cal wiped his face with the back of his wrist. I already did, Theo. Before he died. I didn't tell him, because I didn't think I'd ever have the nerve to show anyone. But, will you come with me? Right now? I want to show you what I built. They walked the quarter-mile past the creek by flashlight, the harvest moon huge and low and orange behind the tree line, neither of them saying much. Cal's hand finding Theo's in the dark without either of them commenting on it. The orchard acres opened up past the last stand of cottonwoods, old apple trees, gnarled and generous, planted by Cal's grandfather 2 generations back, and in the middle of them, half hidden until you were nearly on top of it, stood a small timber frame cabin. New wood, pale against the dark trees, a porch facing east toward the sunrise, string lights wound through the porch rafters and up into the nearest apple tree, unlit, waiting. I started building it 2 years ago, Cal said, voice unsteady. After my dad had his first health scare, and I don't know what I thought. I thought about you every single day I worked on it. I told myself it was stupid, that you'd never come back here, that I'd ruined it beyond fixing. But I kept building anyway. I think some part of me knew I was building it for you, even when I was too scared to admit that to myself. He flipped a switch on the porch post, and the string lights came alive all at once. Through the porch rafters, up into the apple tree, gold and warm against the dark, throwing soft light across the whole small clearing. This is the surprise, Cal said. I know it's not. I don't know what I expected when I called you. I didn't let myself hope you'd actually come, let alone that there'd be any us left to build a life around. But I wanted you to see it. Whatever happens between us, I wanted you to know that even when I was too much of a coward to say the words, I was still out here every night after field work, hammering this together, because some part of me refused to stop believing there might be a version of my life where I got to have both things, this land and you. Theo stood in the golden light with the smell of cut apples in the air and the old ache in his chest finally beginning to loosen. You built me a house, he said. I built us a house. If you'll have it. If you'll have me. Cal's voice cracked entirely on the last words. I know I don't deserve a second chance after what I did to you in that parking lot. But I'm asking anyway, because my father spent his whole life too afraid to say the true thing, and I watched what that cost him, and I don't want to be an old man someday writing a letter to a son I never had, telling him not to be the coward I was. I want to just be brave, now, while it still counts. I love you, Theo. I never stopped. Not for one day of those 4 years. Theo closed the distance between them, cupped Cal's face in both hands, grease-stained, sun-worn, wet with tears he wasn't bothering to hide anymore, and kissed him, slow and certain, under the string lights and the huge orange moon, in an orchard planted by a dead man who'd spent his last letter finally getting brave. I love you too, Theo said, when they broke apart. I never stopped either. That's the whole stupid, wonderful problem. The harvest came in early that year, and this time there were 2 names on the grain co-op ledger, and a hand-painted sign at the end of the gravel lane that read Whitfield Marsh Orchards, and a kitchen, the same one, Walt's old kitchen, repainted a soft sage green, that smelled of brown butter and cut apples every single evening. They were married in October, in the orchard, under the same trees, string lights strung wall to wall through the branches. Half the county in attendance, because it turned out the county had been quietly rooting for them longer than either of them knew. Priya flew in and cried through the whole ceremony and told anyone who'd listened that she'd known Theo was a goner the moment he disappeared into a walk-in cooler over a voicemail. Cal kept the letter framed in the front hall, where anyone coming through the door would see it first. The farm doesn't mean anything if there's nobody in that kitchen with me who I love. Some nights, sitting on the porch of the little timber cabin with the whole Gold County spread out below them, Theo would think about the boy who used to sneak down a cottonwood-lined lane on a silent bicycle, certain the sky would fall the moment anyone found out what he was. It hadn't fallen then. It hadn't fallen now, either. It had just opened up, slow and wide and full of light, exactly the way the best harvests always did.